everyone. So I'm just gonna kind of get going with first talking about why I want to talk about the bench press today. Bench is my favorite lift, and it's been my favorite lift for quite some time. Just a little bit of history about me and the bench press. I did my first competition in 2012, and at my first competition, after only really having been training the barbells for about not even a year at that point, I hit 140 pounds in my first competition. And then I went on to do a couple more competitions, and within about a year, I put 60 pounds on my bench press at my first national competition, which was Raw Unity 7. And then between Raw Unity 7 and USA Powerlifting Raw Nationals 2014, that was my first USAPL Nationals, I was at a 200-pound bench press at that point. So it took me about a year and a half of competing to get to 200. And then from there, it's still been steadily increasing, where I've hit, I hit my first 100-kilo bench press at the Arnold in 2015. And then I remember the day that I hit 225 in the gym, and that was a lifetime goal of mine. And I stood up and I said, I retire. And that was about 3 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. And since then, I've been chasing the goal of 275, and I'm about 5 pounds away from it in competition, 6 pounds away from it in competition. So I have been benching and steadily increasing my bench for the entire length of my competition career, which started in 2012, and we are 6 years later, and I've continually put on pounds on my bench press, and I've put in 6 years of competition, I've put 130 pounds on my bench press. Bench press is my favorite lift. I do bench only competitions. I've competed at the International Powerlifting Federation's Classic Bench Press World Championships. And not only do I love bench pressing, but I love coaching it and I love programming it. And all of my female clients have at least a body weight, if not 1.5 times body weight bench press. And I have a few male clients who are very close to or at 400 pounds on their bench press. So what is it about what I do that facilitates continued progress on the bench press? Really despite programming, but programming has a lot to do with it. I'm not going to say that programming doesn't have anything to do with it, but there's 5 technique considerations that, irrespective of how wide your grip is or how large your arch is, will contribute to improving your bench. And there's 3 programming considerations that we're also going to talk about that contribute to healthy, strong shoulders, and having healthy, strong shoulders will also contribute to continued progress on the bench. So like I said, if you're just joining, I talked a little bit about the history of why I love the bench press and how much progress I've made on the bench press in 6 years of competing. I've put 130 pounds on my bench press in 6 years of competing, and every competition it's steadily gone up, unless it's been like a refresher competition where I'm not trying to peak for it. Every time we've peaked for a competition, my bench has continued to go up. And I've never had an upper extremity, so I've never had a shoulder, elbow, or wrist injury or neck injury related to the bench press. And shoulder, elbow, wrist, and neck injuries are common injuries that we see in the bench press. And a lot of people come to me as a physical therapist and as a strength coach to help them figure out why they're getting injured, why they're staying injured, and why their bench isn't progressing. So we're going to talk about the 5 things with technique that I usually have to address with a client to 1, decrease their pain, 2, improve their bench, And then 3, keep them from not that you can't prevent or really ever say that you can keep someone from getting injured, but really improve their longevity and decrease their risk for injury in the future if you make these 5 technique changes. So that's why we're here. We're going to talk about 5 technique changes and 3 programming considerations for the bench press to improve your bench, make steady progress on your bench, and decrease your risk for injury to the neck, shoulder, elbow, and really not so much the wrist, because I don't really see many wrist injuries with the bench press, but by decreasing your overall risk for upper extremity injury, it probably also includes the wrist. So the first thing that we're going to talk about for technique in the bench press is your eye gaze. One of the common things that I see when someone comes to me without ever having watched a video of mine or read an article of mine or looked at the type of technique that I teach is eye gaze. Eye gaze is really important because it helps us establish a straight bar path, which we're going to talk about later. It's going to be the second consideration. But eye gaze is really important because it helps us establish a straight bar path and balance, and helps us maintain our positioning while we're benching. And it also helps us maintain our focus. So 3 of the common things that I see when people are benching that have to do with their eyes and not really fixing their eye gaze is 1, they're following the bar with their eyes. Following the bar with your eyes causes whether you feel like you're moving your head and your neck or not, and whether you're intentionally moving your head and your neck or you're not. Eye movement causes head and neck movement. Head and neck movement come with an accompanied motion of the shoulder, whether or not you feel it. It's oftentimes very, very small, but it's there. So we want to establish a fixed eye gaze and not move our eyes while we're bench pressing. Also, your eye gaze, if you're not focusing on one point, you have a lack of focus and can cause distraction. You might see something or hear something and your eyes move in a different direction, and you're just not focused, and that causes a change in the bar path. And then the last thing is that even if someone does have a fixed eye gaze and they're not looking all over the place and they're not following the bar, oftentimes I see that their eye gaze is a little bit too far forward. So what I'm talking about is pretend I'm lying on the bench and you're looking straight up at the ceiling. Okay, that's great. But sometimes they might be looking straight, but they're looking at a fixed point too close to the bar. So this little bit of movement from here to here can cause a change in the bar path, or a not ideal bar path. So just to recap, we have following the bar with our eyes. We have unfocused eye gaze, so not really looking at anything specific, and then something that's not straight, that's down. So instead of looking this way, they're looking that way. So it might be fixed to a point, but it's too close to the bar. So what you want to do with your eye gaze on the bench press is once you take the bar out of the rack and settle it over your shoulders in the locked out position, you then want to find a spot directly up. So it's as if this position of your head and eyes straight forward is just on the bench, okay, just straight, okay? And then leave your eyes there. You'll be able to see the bar in your peripheral vision, and you'll use that point with the bar in the peripheral vision to bring the bar back to there. So you don't have to watch the bar. Just keep your eyes focused and the bar returns to the same spot in your peripheral vision. So that's eye gaze. Fix your eye gaze to a point straight up above you. Now, sometimes the ceiling is really, really far away if you're in an industrial type of gym. That's okay. I swear and I promise that if you just look straight up, your eyes will focus on something up there. So find that something. People often ask me, what the hell do you look at in a competition? To be honest, because it's so ingrained in me in training that once I get to competition and there is nothing above me because it's competition day and I can't see anything anyway, it doesn't matter because my eyes are trained to just stay straight and not move, okay? So that's how you establish your eye gaze. Always focus on something straight up above you and never look down never look at the bar, and never lose focus while you're benching. Eye gaze helps maintain, having a fixed eye gaze helps maintain having a straight bar path. A lot of the times I see people who have a curved bar path, so they'll push it up and then back, or they'll do like this S curve or C curve, like whatever. Okay, so the bar starts directly over your shoulders so that we are balanced. Our shoulder muscles don't really have to do anything extra at the top. And then we're going to bring the bar down to a lower point on our chest. So when the bar is up in the locked out position, it's going to be directly over the shoulder joint. Then when you bring the bar down to your chest, it's going to touch a little bit lower. So while this isn't a direct vertical bar path, it's still straight. It's just diagonal. So if you're imagining me from the side, and here's my shoulders, and here's where the bar starts, and then here's that point on my chest, the bar is going like this. It's still a straight line, it's just not vertical. Okay, so this vertical bar path will cause impingement in the shoulder. So that's why we touch down lower to get a 70-degree angle at the shoulder. That protects us against impingement. It protects us against different types of shoulder injuries. Impingement is really the biggest one. Excuse me. Okay, so bar path. We don't want to do a curve, and we don't want to do a curve the other way. And we don't want to go straight down and up. We want to go from over the shoulders to a point lower on the chest. So a point over the shoulders at lockout, and bring the bar lower to a point on the chest. And the travel from here to here is a straight line, not a curved line. Okay, the third technique consideration is leg drive. Leg drive is tremendously important for assisting moving heavy load. If there's no leg drive involved in the lift, then your shoulders and your pecs, your pec muscles particularly, and the anterior deltoid are at risk for overuse. So we will utilize leg drive to assist in moving heavy load. If we are not using leg drive, we will not be able to move as much load. So one, it helps us move more load, and two, it helps us decrease the risk for injury of the anterior chest muscles and anterior shoulder muscles. For demonstration on leg drive, demonstration on bar path, and demonstration on eye gaze, you can check out the bench press video that is on the Progressive Rehab and Strength YouTube channel. I have highlighted 3 bench articles and 1 bench tutorial on the on my profile. So if you go over to my Instagram profile, Rori Megan, and you click the highlight, you can get the link directly to the YouTube video that goes over all of these technique considerations that we're talking about. So leg drive is huge. And once I get people to learn how to properly leg drive, they tend to have a reduced irritation of their shoulder long term, and they can move more load. Okay. The fourth consideration is elbow position. So oftentimes you hear about tucking your elbows or flaring your elbows. You really shouldn't do either of those. When you bring the bar down, so remember we just discussed the bar path starting over the shoulder joint and then bringing it down to a point lower on the chest. Just bring the bar down. Don't do anything with your elbows other than bring them down to the ground. You want to make sure they're just slightly in front of the bar, not too far in front of the bar, and you don't want them behind the bar either. So what I like to coach when people are having trouble with this is to simply bring their elbows down to the ground. Now, if you feel like you're flaring your elbows too much, you can think about gently bringing them in towards your rib cage. And if you feel like you are over tucking your elbows, then you want to think about keeping your elbows under the bar as you bring the bar down to your chest. So elbows should be slightly in front of the bar, not very far in front of the bar, and not behind the bar at all. Okay? So elbow position is also discussed in that YouTube video tutorial that I told you that I highlighted in my Instagram story. So I do see a couple of questions coming in. I have one more technique consideration to discuss with you, and as soon as I'm done with the 5 technique considerations, I'll go through the questions and see which ones I can answer, and then we'll go into the 3 programming considerations. So the last technique consideration that I wanted to discuss that I often see come along with injuries in the upper extremity and neck associated with the bench press is losing tightness in the chest wall during the bench press, or not achieving enough tightness in the chest wall or in the thoracic region during the bench press. So we want to develop tension and tightness in our thoracic region in order to create a stable base for us to transfer strength and move the load. So we talked earlier about leg drive. So that leg drive that we're pushing into the ground has to transfer through our thorax, through our midsection, to our shoulders, to the bar. So we want to get as tight as possible in our setup that we can in order to transfer the effort that we're putting in with our legs to the bar. Additionally, getting tight in the thoracic region will create stability in the shoulders. In order for us to have a strong bench press, we have to be stable in our shoulders. So when you take the bar out of the rack, you want to take the appropriate amount of time that you need to get your shoulders down and back, puff your chest up, and bring your feet back just a little bit to create this bow across your midsection. So that's getting tight enough, but then we tend to see that people lose tightness while they are bench pressing. The biggest thing that I see is when someone starts nice like this, and then as the bar comes down to their chest, they sink. So there's 2 things that I like to talk about to maintain this chest tightness while we're benching. So you never want to lose this position when the bar touches your chest. So 1, you can think about always puffing your chest up towards the bar no matter what. So as the bar touches you, pushing your chest into the bar more. And then the second thing that you can use if that cue isn't helping you well enough is a t-shirt press. So you want to bring the bar down and it should just touch your shirt. You shouldn't feel it on if you're a male, you shouldn't feel it on your pecs, and if you're a female, you shouldn't feel it on your boobs. So never let your boobs or your pecs deform from the bar. So kind of actually 3 things I forgot as I'm talking. I'm just remembering that I like to use this one. I also talk about keeping the load in your hands rather than letting your chest accept any load of the bar. So want to think about puffing your chest up towards the bar as the bar comes down and comes in contact with you. You want to think about only touching your shirt and not your pecs or your boobs. And you want to think about keeping the load in your hands and not on your chest. This helps when we go to press the bar off of our chest in competition. If we sink or allow it to compress us, then we have to regenerate all of that force that we just lost. So we want to stay as tight as possible to transfer as much force into the bar as we can. This also has implications at the shoulder. If, as you bring the bar down from here, if you're tight and then you lose tightness, you get rounding in your shoulder, and you can get all types of shoulder injuries, whether it's an injury to the pec, the biceps tendon, or even the rotator cuff. So keeping that puffed up position, shoulder tightness, is extremely important in protecting the structures of the shoulder. Okay, so those are the 5 technique considerations that I almost have to discuss with every person who comes to me for an injury. They can can all be found in the YouTube tutorial on the Progressive Rehab and Strength YouTube page, which I've highlighted in my personal Instagram story, the highlights in my bio, whatever that thing is called. So if you go ahead and click there to watch the bench press tutorial, it goes over all of these 5 considerations that I talked about in terms of technique and getting a stronger bench and protecting your shoulder against injury. Now, it's, again, like I said at the beginning, it's not about preventing shoulder injuries. It's about protecting your shoulder and reducing the possible injury risk. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the questions that were coming in while I was talking about this, and I'll see what there is for me to answer. All right. Suggestions for the best way to get feet flat versus on toes. So I don't know if this Ashton K is still in the live right now, but I am guessing that maybe you bench on your toes right now, and you are maybe potentially moving to a federation where you need to bench with flat feet. So one thing that I like to do, and I've actually competed in federations where you can bench on your toes, and then moved into a federation where you can't bench on your toes. And even in like my off season, I like to bench on my toes because it just feels a little bit better on my knees. So what I recommend in that case is set up how you would normally set up if you were benching on your toes. And then just wiggle your feet forward. So get your tightness, get your arch, everything that you need to. Take the bar out of the rack. And then once you're in position, just gently slide your feet flat. So it's not much of a position change. So that's one way to go from benching on your toes to benching flat foot. If that is the question, I can't really, otherwise I don't really understand the question. Thoughts on the overhead press variation? Well, we're not really discussing overhead press right now, but we will when we get to the programming considerations. Personally, I like the 1.0 because, so for anyone who doesn't know what the overhead press 1.0 versus the overhead 2.0 is, the overhead 1.0 is a strict press that doesn't utilize any knee or hip motion. The press 2.0 utilizes a hip rebound, really, to assist in moving load. So it basically causes a stretch reflex on the front of the body and then throws the bar up from the bottom. So the reason I don't particularly like the 2.0 is because it's a bit more technical, and for the general strength trainee, it can be challenging to get the technique initially. So for that reason, I like to start with the 1.0, and once they can get the 1.0, then potentially move to the 2.0. A lot of people with back injuries can't tolerate the press 2.0. And because I work with a lot of people remotely, it's more challenging to teach the 2.0. Additionally, if y'all know, I am a starting strength coach, and when I took the starting strength certification and when I started using the starting strength model, it was the 1.0. So I've been utilizing the strict press since I began lifting. So I kind of was resistant to change. And I also have a very strong overhead press and a very strong bench press, so I didn't feel like I needed to move to the 2.0 because it utilizes more muscle mass. Like, I feel like I have enough personally. Plus, it also hurts my back. So I don't have chronic back pain, but when I do the 2.0, it irritates my back. So because I don't personally use it, I don't feel the most confident teaching it or requiring that someone uses it, because I know that it can be challenging to learn. I know that it can irritate your back, and I don't think that it's necessary to do one versus the other. There's a press 1.5, which utilizes 2.0 in the first rep and then the 1.0 on the rest of the reps. By all means, that's a little bit easier to use for high volume sets. Again, the 2.0 can get very exhausting when you're doing like sets of 8 6, 7, 8 reps, it's very exhausting. So I just prefer the 1.0 because of those reasons. Yep, that's that. Okay, next question. Thanks for the IG Live. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. I started developing soreness around the inside of my right elbow. I believe it's from benching and not the low bar back squat. Close grip bench and the football bar doesn't irritate it. Could you suggest a rehab protocol? It's hard to say what the protocol would be because I would need to see what your bench press looks like. So the first thing that I would recommend is checking out the bench press tutorial. Like I said earlier, it's linked in the highlights in my IG bio. So you just go over to my bio after this and click the link for the YouTube video, watch it, and see if there's anything going on with your technique that is different from what I mentioned in the video. Plus, I go over the wrong ways to do things in the video as well. So you might find that there's something that you're doing that could be contributing to elbow pain. So why don't you go check that out? But if close grip feels better, it might be that your grip is too wide. So go ahead and watch the video because it talks about grip width. So that might answer your question. If you're having pain with your regular grip and close grip feels better, perhaps your bench press is just too wide. So bench with a lower, more narrow grip. Again, that's really the only way that I can help you without really doing a full assessment, knowing a full history, and looking at your lifts and looking at your programming. Okay. I've been trying the usual recommendations to get leg drive to improve. I train by myself, so I don't have anyone that I can have put their hands on my shoulders to get some tactile help. I train by myself, so I don't. So, okay, actually, this is an interesting one. So, I'd have to find it on my Instagram, but it depends. Oh, I have something on my lips. Sorry about that. So I've done like an isometric. I've used this with a person who is really struggling to utilize her leg drive. So it's where you need pins and then something above the pins, and the bar has to be set in between the two. So it's not actually a full rep. Justin, I can send this to you after the live IG, but thank you for inspiring me. I might do a YouTube series on leg drive because actually this drill is really helpful. So basically you have to set the pins at chest level, but then you need another pin above that pin, but the bar, so you're gonna have to set the bar first between the two pins. And then you basically get into your bench setup with the bar on the pins. So it's a little challenging to get into the bench setup, but you can do some isometric holds. I like 5 seconds. It should be really lightweight, maybe like 95 pounds or 135 pounds, like something that's very light that you could do for like 10, 15 reps. And basically what you do is get into your bench setup, and you press the bar off the pins into the pin that's above it, and you count to 5. But while you're pressing the bar into the pins that are above the bar, you are really pushing your legs into the ground. So this is another drill that can help you further understand and feel leg drive if you're not really grasping it from the traditional tips and tricks that I have talked about previously. So I will find that that's like definitely on my Instagram. So I'll just go back, send me a direct message after this so I can remember to send it to you, but it's definitely there, and I'll just send it to you so that you have an idea. I might even put it on my story and then highlight it into the bench tips because that's a really good drill. Okay, thoughts on push-ups and as assistant exercise for novice females who need to build upper body mass, other preferred exercises. I don't think push-ups are necessary. Bench and bench more. You can't really quantify how you're progressing push-ups, so there's no progressive overload for them. I would say it depends how long you've been doing this, but you should be benching, if you're a novice, you should be benching 1 to 2 times a week. So basically every 14 days you should be benching 3 times and overhead pressing 3 times. That's the standard novice linear progression that's outlined in Starting Strength Basic Barbell Programming. Adding a little bit of weight every time you bench press. So that is the first way to get stronger. And then after you've worn out your novice gains bench pressing, which for a young, healthy female should be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. After you've worn out your bench press, then your bench press, strict bench press, novice gains, then I would transition to higher frequency, so 3 days per week, a heavy, light, medium approach, where you have a volume bench, an overhead press volume, and then an intensity assistance exercise. So the one that I like the best to default to is close grip bench press or pause bench press. Okay, but not push-ups. They're not really a supplemental or assistance exercise because you can't really progressively overload them and quantify progress with them. Okay, I tend to flare my elbows out and have struggled to keep them in. Any suggestions to remedy this? Tempo work. So tempo and paused work. So tempo work really allows us to think while we're lifting. So if you're moving too fast, then you don't have time to think about what you're doing. So the first thing that I would do is start with the tempo work with a 3. When do you flare? Struggle to keep them in. So I would focus on a 3 count down, a 1 count on the chest, and then a 3 count up. But you also want to look at where you're touching on your chest. So if you're touching too high on your chest, your elbows will tend to fall behind the bar. And also if you are sinking your chest, your elbows will tend to fall behind the bar as well. So you have to look at what your chest is doing, and you have to look at what your eyes are doing, because we talked about all of those in the 5 technique considerations. We talked about anything that can move the head, the neck, or the shoulders is also going to cause your elbows to flare. So address those and use a tempo and see how that goes. Okay. What do you think of that? That is nothing to do with the bench press, so I won't answer that. Okay, so there you go. We have just discussed the 5 technique considerations for a bigger, healthier bench press. And I've answered all the questions that came in while I was discussing that. So now we're going to move on to programming considerations. But first, I'm going to take a little bit of water because my throat's dry, friends. So just give me a minute. Watch me like spill this all over myself. Every time I drink from this thing, it's like, I should get something with like a little top. Okay, so for the people who just joined, we are doing, excuse me, we are doing a talk on the bench press, and we just discussed 5 considerations for technique that will help you improve your bench press so that it continues to get stronger and helps you be resilient to injury. And now we're going to go on to programming. So I talk about technique first because it doesn't matter what your program looks like. If your technique sucks, then you're just not going to make great progress, and you're going to be much more susceptible to injury. But you can be on a not great program and still make really decent progress and not injure yourself, not be at as much risk for injury because your technique is solid. So really the foundations for everything that I do with my clients at PRS is always comes down to technique, really breaking down and assessing the technique first and then addressing the programming. So the basic program that I recommend for novice trainees and how to get the most novice gains out of your time as a beginner lifter is the Starting Strength Novice Linear Progression. So that's benching, so it's 3 days per week, and week 1 you do bench, overhead press, bench, and week 2 you do overhead press, bench, then overhead press. You do this for as long as you possibly can, for 3 sets of 5 and then 5 sets of 3, whatever you need to do to to extend your novice linear progression as long as possible. And once you get to the novice center request me, I have no idea who you are, and I'm not going to put anyone in this, at least not until the end. So let me just explain how this is going to work. I'm going to talk about programming considerations. There's 3 programming considerations I'm going to talk about. I'm going to save all of the questions for the end. At the end of me talking about the 3 programming considerations, then I'll go through all the questions and answer them. And hopefully I get through them before the time is up, because Instagram does shut off lives after an hour. So we have 25 minutes. So just, you can type your questions in. I'm not letting anybody come in live with me, but you can type your questions in and I will answer them as soon as I'm done. So once you are no longer a novice and you've worn out your linear gains, my recommendation is 3 days a week minimum of upper body pushing. So upper body pushing and the bench press can tolerate more frequency than our lower body lifts. The typical intermediate and advanced lifter that I work with benefits most from a 3 to 4 day a week frequency. Okay? So that's benching. So some type of flat bench or inclined bench exercise 4 days per week. 3 to 4 days per week. Now, of those 4 days, at least one of those days should additionally have overhead pressing. Overhead pressing, so this is the second technique, second programming consideration. So the first one is frequency, 3 to 4 days per week. The upper body lift, the bench press, and your pushing motion can tolerate more frequency than your lower body lifts can. So 3 to 4 days per week. On rare occasions, some crazy people like me can tolerate 5 days per week. But again, it's tolerance at that point, and your injury history. So if you have like a very long history of shoulder issues and elbow issues related to bench press, or like wrist issues related to bench press, I wouldn't necessarily say bump up to 5 days per week. But for someone who's been injury free or very minimally injured over the course of their training history, and they already are training 4 days per week, and they have a big bench and they need to take it to the next level, 5 days a week, fine if you can tolerate it, as long as your program is balanced. So frequency, 3 to 4 days per week, maybe 5 if you're that small percentage of the population that can really handle it and is injury free. Then the next programming consideration is overhead pressing. The overhead press ensures that you are training your shoulder girdle through its full range of motion. So you're strengthening the shoulder girdle through its full range of motion. 9 times out of 10, when someone has come to me with a shoulder injury, I look at their programming and I say, okay, well, it's missing overhead press. Now, if it's not missing overhead press, then I say, show me your overhead press. And chances are they're not doing the overhead press correctly. So keeping putting the overhead press in your program, especially with proper execution of the overhead press, ensures that you're strengthening your shoulder girdle through its full range of motion. Then the last programming consideration, which often falls short in many powerlifters' programming, is upper back work. So we're doing a lot of benching or pressing motions, but we don't counteract that or counterbalance that with the same amount, or if not more, upper back work in the opposite direction. So our chest muscles, or the muscles on the anterior side of our body, are much larger and much stronger and more dominant than the muscles between our shoulder blades, on our shoulder blades, so the opposing shoulder girdle muscles. So the general recommendation or rule of thumb is for every push that you should have 2 pulls. Now, this can become time consuming. It can be very challenging on your grip muscles. So what I recommend is at least doing chin-ups and pull-ups once a week. So that's 2 okay? And the deadlift can also be considered an upper back exercise or a pulling or opposing exercise. So if you're deadlifting twice a week, that also counts. So if you're benching 4 days per week, you have 4 bench movements, and you have 2 deadlift movements, and you have 1 chin-up and 1 pull-up, you should be okay. Because think about how much heavier your deadlift is relative to your bench press. So while it's not the 2-to-1 exercise ratio in terms of load and total tonnage, it is double your bench press. It could be more than double your bench press. So we're pretty good, generally speaking, if you have 2 deadlift motions. So whether it's stiff leg deadlifts, pendlay rows, RDLs, competition deadlift, block pulls, all of those count as upper back work, okay? And you can count them as 1.5 upper back exercises. Chin-ups, pull-ups, and if you're not at a body weight pull-up or chin-up, assistance, the assistance machine or bands or inverted rows, whatever you need to do. Now, if you have no elbow issues and no grip issues, and your body, your arms tolerate the upper back work that you're already doing, the essentials, the 2 deadlifts and the chin-ups and the pull-ups, then you can add in an additional row. I like to throw in either pendlay rows, inverted rows, or dumbbell rows are my favorite. I also like to throw in lat pull down. So if you can't do chin-ups and pull-ups and your gym doesn't have an assistance pull-up machine, or you don't have bands, the lat pull down is a great alternative for a pull-up or chin-up. So the 3 programming considerations for healthy shoulders and strong shoulders in the bench press are frequency. So that's 3 to 4 times per week. And if you're that small percentage of the population that's injury-free for a lifetime, and you already have a really strong bench and you're already benching 4 days per week, possibly add in a 5th day. And then definitely at least 1 day of overhead pressing, a very good overhead press. And I will have a video out on the overhead press after I finish doing the deadlift video, which should be coming out in the next week or so. So the overhead press video should be coming out in 2 to 3 weeks. Overhead press at least once per week. And then upper back work, 2-to-1 ratio. So 2 pulls for every push that you do, but a deadlift motion can be considered 2 because of the load that's being used. So 2 deadlift motions. Start with your chin-ups and your pull-ups as your default upper back, and then as you tolerate or as you need, add in rows, inverted rows, dumbbell rows, pendlay rows, lat pull down. Those are just some general recommendations. So there you have it. We just discussed the 5 technique considerations and the 3 programming considerations for a very strong bench press with healthy shoulders that decrease your risk for injury long term and help boost and continue your progress on the bench press. Just to recap everything, we talked about eye gaze, fixing your eye gaze to one point on the ceiling. We talked about the bar path being straight, a straight diagonal from directly over your shoulders to a lower point on your chest, not a curved bar path, but a straight line, a straight diagonal from over the shoulders to a lower point on your chest. We talked about the utilization of leg drive, which I'm going to highlight a leg drive, what is the word? A leg drive tip, I guess, exercise to practice, to the bench press story highlight on my bio or Instagram bio, whatever you want to call it. We talked about elbow position, not being tucked and not being flared, but keeping your elbows slightly in front of the bar. We talked about maintaining a tight torso and not letting the bar sink into your chest, causing rounding of your shoulders. And we then talked about 3 programming considerations, being frequency of the bench press after the novice phase, being 3 to 4 days per week for most people. For the really, really healthy person who's never had a neck, shoulder, elbow, or wrist injury, you might be able to add in a 5th day, but only add it when necessary. Every program should consist of 1 day a week, at least minimum, bare minimum, always 52 weeks a year, having overhead press in the program as well for healthy, strong shoulders through the full range of motion of all of the muscles in the joint. And then upper back work in a 2-to-1 ratio. Your deadlift can be considered 2 upper back exercises because of the load associated with the lift. My go-to after the 2 deadlift motions every week are chin-ups and pull-ups, which you can substitute with assisted pull-ups or band-assisted pull-ups, and a lat pull-down if you can't do pull-ups. And then rowing exercises that I love include the Pendlay row, the dumbbell row, the seated row, and inverted row. So let me go through and see if there are any questions here that I'll answer. And then if there aren't, I'll just stick around for a little bit longer. I actually don't see any programming questions. There are no programming questions, so I guess that's it. I'm going to try and save this and get it up on YouTube if it came out well. So anyway, thank you for coming. That's the first time I've ever done like a live tutorial. I've done like live IGs where you just come in and like ask me anything, but this is oh, Justin, what's your question? Go ahead. Shoot. So there are a couple people just joining. I actually just finished the live talk. So this will be up on my Instagram for 24 hours, I guess. That's how it works. And I'm going to try and pull it from Instagram and get it up on YouTube if that's possible. Okay, what do you think about the close grip bench press versus incline in terms of carryover? So I actually really like both of those exercises in terms of carryover to comp bench. So I think that it depends on how advanced you are. In the early intermediate stage, I think that the close grip bench press and the incline bench press are really, really, really good exercises. And I think that I really like the incline bench press because remember how I just talked about programming overhead press once a week? The incline bench press is kind of like an intermediate range of motion between the flat bench and the overhead press. So I feel in terms of, I almost always include the incline bench press in someone's programming because I feel like it has good carryover to general shoulder health, which then will carry over to shoulder strength and improve strength in the bench press. So I really, really like the incline bench. I also really like the close grip bench press, but I think that I actually default more to incline bench than I do to close grip bench. I think before I would default to close grip bench press, I'll default to a 2-count bench because I think I like how a 2-count bench press carries over to improved control and improved technique in the regular main bench press. Now, again, or not again, I haven't mentioned this, when looking at someone as a lifter and deciding what assistance exercises or supplemental exercises are appropriate for them, you need to look at where their flaws are or where their weakest link is in the kinetic chain and in the actual motion of the lift. So are they failing at lockout? Are they failing mid-range and higher? Or are they failing right off the chest? So for someone who's failing mid-range, that's going to be like a tricep issue. So a close grip bench press would be appropriate for that person. But in general, I do like to include the incline bench press because of the overall strength gap that it fills in the shoulder itself, which carries over, I think, more to the bench than anything else. Plus, it's a little bit lighter overall in terms of the loads that are being used. So it's a good way to increase frequency without overloading the nervous system or the muscles and increasing fatigue too high. So it can be used as like a fatigue control also. So there you go. So if there's any more questions about technique or programming, feel free to ask. If not, I've basically gone through everything that I had planned for today. And if I don't have any more questions, then I'm going to end this Instagram
and it will be up Instagram Live, and it'll be up on my Instagram for 24 hours with the whole lecture that covered 5 technique tips and 3 programming tips for a big bench and healthy shoulders. So you are welcome, Justin, and everybody else, you're welcome. And I thank all of you who came today because I truly enjoyed this. It was fun to get ready. I'm so passionate about the bench press. I'm so passionate about technique and programming. I thoroughly enjoy this and I love helping people. So, oh, Natasha, you came. Thanks, girl. So I'm going to try and plan another one of these as the inspiration comes up. If you have any suggestions for the next one, let me know in a direct message or whatever. I love chatting with you guys. I love your questions. I love when you send me direct messages. I love when you send me funny things or videos of yours to watch. And like, I try and help anybody as much as I can. So feel free to reach out with questions and ideas for further live tutorials and YouTube tutorials. If you want a technique video on something, just shoot me a DM and I will try and get there and set up a tutorial on YouTube for you as well. All right, bye guys.